September 16, 2021. Good day all. This is a message from Sierra Victor. We continue with message number 10 of counter-guerrilla operations with FM 90-8/MCRP 333A as reference and discuss counterinsurgency operations. The reason we have decided on this counter-guerrilla program was because this is the most likely threat to South Africa. The chances of an old-school conventional takeover by another country is very small. The future nature of warfare globally is more one of terrorism. This is not to say that there will never be a conventional conflict again, but the biggest threat currently is of an insurgency and guerrilla type. Let's look at operating principles for own forces. Intelligence. Tactical intelligence is the key to defeating the guerrilla. It provides the commander with information about guerrilla locations, activities, strengths, weaknesses, and plans which enable the commander to seize the initiative. Without intelligence sources, the chances of success, particularly in offensive operations, are limited and the commander must react to guerrilla initiatives rather than controlling the situation in the area of operations. Sources will include the local populace, captured enemy, intercepted communications, observer and reconnaissance teams, and to a certain extent the media and media statements from the guerrilla through social or official media. Tactical situation. The organization for, and conduct of, counter-guerrilla operations is dependent on the tactical situation. Units are organized and employed to counter the current guerrilla threat. For example, if guerrillas are operating in platoon-size units, then platoon or company-size units are used against them. These units conduct independent operations such as patrols and ambushes, under centralized control, company or battalion. This enables them to cover more areas simultaneously than a larger unit and still have the firepower to deal with the typical guerrilla unit they might encounter. Employing a large force to counter a significantly smaller guerrilla force is inefficient because it compromises the chance of achieving surprise, reduces the area that can be covered at any one time, and is more difficult to move than a smaller force, if it is required elsewhere. However, sending a small force to counter a significantly larger guerrilla force may prove disastrous unless the smaller force is supported by fire or can be rapidly reinforced. Flexibility. Forces engaged in counter-guerrilla operations are flexible and capable of adapting to rapidly changing tactical situations. The nature of counter-guerrilla warfare necessitates being able to make swift transitions from large to small unit operations, to adjust to extremes of terrain, weather, and visibility, to move on foot, by vehicle, or by aircraft, and to function in offensive or defensive modes. Adapting to changing tactical situations keeps the guerrilla force off balance and prevents it from developing effective tactical operations. Mobility. Counter-guerrilla forces most possess mobility equal to or greater than that of the guerrilla in order to find, fix, fight, and pursue him. Since the guerrilla is primarily foot mobile, counter-guerrilla forces equipped with motorized, mechanized, or air transportation assets would appear to have a significant mobility advantage. However, the guerrilla typically operates from terrain that precludes, or severely limits, speed on a ground approach. The counter-guerrilla force's mobility advantage may not be as great as it first appears to be. When terrain, weather, or the guerrilla force disposition precludes closing on guerrilla positions by high-speed air or ground transport, then counter-guerrilla forces should be moved by the fastest available transportation to the nearest suitable, safe area to launch foot-mobile operations. A well-trained, foot-mobile counter-guerrilla force, that can use terrain better than the enemy, can achieve a tactical mobility advantage. Commanders should not overburden soldiers with excessive loads because the guerrillas will be able to outrun them. Soldiers should carry only the things they need to find and fix the guerrilla. Once this is accomplished, they can be resupplied by ground or air. Minimum use of force. Only the minimal firepower needed to accomplish a given mission is employed. If own forces come under guerrilla fire, and if by returning fire non-combatant civilians may be injured or their homes and property destroyed, then only the amount of fire necessary to protect own forces is returned. Under these circumstances, the commander attempts to suppress the guerrillas with minimal return fire, possibly using snipers, and moves his forces to advantageous positions from which he may engage the guerrillas while not endangering civilian life or property. If the guerrillas cannot be engaged without endangering civilian life or property, the commander moves his forces, over covered or concealed routes, to positions that cut off their escape routes and encircle them. Then he begins to tighten the ring around them. Patience. Counter-guerrilla forces must anticipate long periods without making contact. The guerrilla knows he is outnumbered and outgunned and avoids engagement unless it is on his terms. Counter-guerrilla forces should not develop a false sense of security if it appears the guerrilla has ceased operations in their area. It must be assumed that the guerrilla is always observing the operating patterns of the counter-guerrilla force for weak points, and waiting for lax security to strike with minimum risk. A guerrilla attack must be expected at any time. Reserves. 1. The commander always maintains a reserve to take advantage of sudden opportunities, and to counter guerrilla initiatives. The size of the reserve depends on the size of its parent unit and the tactical situation. 2. In offensive operations, a company might keep a squad in reserve, battalions, a platoon, and brigade, a company. 3. In defensive operations, because of the need for 360-degree security, a reserve at company and battalion is complicated by the fact that the online strength of the perimeter is reduced. 4. The company or battalion commander may have to spread his forces thin to protect his perimeter. In these instances, the commander has 4 options: establish a small, centrally located reserve at the expense of online strength, establish no reserve but specify units online to be prepared to shift a portion of their strength to other sections of the perimeter, establish no reserve but reinforce the most heavily contested section of the perimeter by fire, and consider reducing the size of the perimeter. 5. Brigades too should maintain a company in reserve in defensive operations. This mission should be rotated among companies, with the company that has spent the most time in the field, or that has seen the heaviest action, being designated as the reserve. The reserve company can rest, rearm, and train during the time it has the reserve mission. 6. The reserve unit should be highly mobile. Air transport is the preferred method for moving the reserve because it is fast and not dependent on open ground routes as are motorized or mechanized modes of transport. Whatever its mode of transportation, the reserve's vehicles are dedicated to the reserve and immediately available for employment. 7. Reserve units are prepared for contingency missions. If the reserve is committed, the commander designates a new reserve. In this case, his least committed unit is the first choice. Due to WhatsApp audio length, we keep our message between 5 and 10 minutes. In our next message, we will continue and then we'll look at operating principles. In our next message we will look at strike campaigns. Please visit our Dropbox account for all our previous material. Links can be obtained from any admin on the Sierra Victor groups. Thank you for listening or reading this message. Please feel free to use and distribute as needed. Our messages are not by any means enticing you to a revolution of sorts, but rather to equip you with the necessary theoretical background in order to assist local armed forces or police in stabilizing a SHTF situation. We wish you well. Sierra Victor.